Hi there, welcome back to the Middle East video blog. I'm Jay.
I'm Merve. Today we're doing our fourth episode and we're calling it It's All About Israel.
It's all about Israel, isn't it though?
Well, the episode is, if anything. And so we thought, we're talking about the Middle East all this time and we cannot talk about the Middle East without talking about Israel.
So if you've been following the news lately, you've been hearing a lot about U.S.-Israel relations. The Iran nuclear deal is really causing a lot of friction between America and Israel, who are traditionally regarded as very strong historic allies. I think it's important when we first start this entire segment, let's just dial all the way back. Let's look back in time to Israel's foundation. My understanding is that it was very much in reaction to the Holocaust, that historically speaking, for centuries, the Jewish people have been persecuted, no matter where they are. And the Holocaust was the biggest event yet that threatened the existence of Judaism and the Jewish people. So there was a lot of sentiment in the international community, all right, maybe they should finally have their own state. Maybe they should finally have a place to call home.
And it was finally in 1948.
Right, the state was created in 1948.
What I'm really interested in looking at U.S.-Israeli relations is that as a non-American, it was very shocking to me to find out that the relations were not as good as they were in 2000s, in the 1990s, as before. So
I think one of the first historical examples of America and Israel actually disagreeing dates back to 1953. The president of Egypt, Nasser, decided to nationalize the Suez Canal, which was built with a lot of British and French money and international support. It's a major intersection for international commerce and trade, not to mention the oil that passes through the Suez Canal. So for Egypt to just decide, okay, everyone else chipped in some money to build this, we're just going to take it for ourselves now and start charging you money to use it, that's a very controversial thing to do. So Britain, France, and Israel very quickly condemned the president of Egypt, and they wanted to strike. They wanted even to threaten war. If he wasn't going to open the canal back up, they were going to go to war. American President Eisenhower very sharply told them, no, you are not allowed to go to war over this. We will find another means to solve this problem. So this was a very serious, substantial disagreement between not only America and Israel, but America and France, and America and Britain.
So this was the Suez Crisis, as we would say, and afterwards, American-Israeli relations developed in a rather spectacular way.
Right. So it was kind of, I guess we could say it was kind of a rocky start, but things improved rapidly.
But I think it was important for us to sort of mention this whole thing, especially for our international viewers, because if you were as shocked as I was when I realized, wait, so America and Israel have not been best friends forever?
Over time, the general trend has been for relations to get better, for America to give more and more money to Israel. One of the biggest ways that we give money and support to Israel is through military aid, because Israel faces serious military threats in the region. You know, immediately after Israel declared its independence and that it was going to be its own state.
The day after, no? It was the day after.
The day after. Nearly every regional state bordering Israel declared
surrounding
war.
it. So it's like a
states like Egypt, like Syria, like Lebanon, they declared war on Israel. So from the moment that Israel was created, they were at war. And
it was a vulnerable state. You declare your independence and you're in a hostile region towards you. And all of a sudden you get all these attacks. I mean, it's understandable how a country like that would need foreign allies. I think one of the biggest reasons why the United States and Israel are so close is because Israel is really the one ally that the United States has in the Middle East that it agrees with ideologically, right? So in terms of a humanitarian level, in terms of democracy, to its own citizens, in terms of democracy, in terms of freedom and personal freedoms and rights.
If you also just look at
what other country is there really there? I mean, that the United States allies with that is so modern and, as we call it, Western, right?
That was what I was going to get to, is that there's almost a philosophical difference between Israel and its citizens and the citizens in other countries in the Middle East. There's sort of a fault line from a perspective of international relations and international history about what's considered Western and what's considered Eastern, and the philosophy coming out of the Israeli government and the majority of its people is very much Western in orientation. There's lots of quotes from
Yeah.
famous authors and even politicians saying that Israel is part of the West. And so you have this sort of philosophical agreement because America is considered the cradle of democracy and the birthplace of freedom. Israel is considered the light post of democracy in the Middle East.
Obviously, this alliance between this ideological alliance between the United States and Israel also translates into a military alliance from the foreign aid that the United States is giving. A lot of people will cite always that, the U.S. is giving so much money to Israel. Well, let's break down this aid a little bit.
One of the biggest components of the defense relationship, the military relationship between America and Israel, has to do with missile defense. Israel is very worried that the other countries could gang up on them and send missiles into Israel because it's a very tiny nation. It's about the size of New Jersey. So missile defense is an important component. Back in 2006, America appropriated $132 million to missile defense. By 2010, it was up to about $200 million. 2011, $415 million.
And this military aid that the United States is giving to Israel is often cited among all the anti-Israeli rhetoric in the Middle East, sort of saying like, the Israel is essentially controlled by the United States because they're giving so much money. But really, how much of U.S. foreign aid is really being given?
The number one recipient of U.S. military aid is Afghanistan. Let's look now to the current state of U.S.-Israeli affairs and relations. There's been a lot of disagreement. It's well known that the president and the prime minister, Barack Obama, Benjamin Netanyahu, they don't exactly get along.
Yeah, and there are a lot of arguments saying that since Obama got elected, maybe because he's a Democrat, I don't know, maybe because it's Obama, personally, but since he got elected, that the U.S.-Israeli relations have been deteriorating. Israelis seem to be upset about a lot of American policy that includes Israel. So Iran would be one of them, the peace process. They seem, with the settlements, all the comments that the United States is making, all of a sudden this country that used to be so much in support of Israel is saying, maybe don't do the settlements, maybe don't.
And America has been arguably the most important third-party country in the entire peace process between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
They were there in Camp David. We'll get back to that in a little bit under the Clinton administration. They were there in Oslo. I mean, the Americans have played a fundamental role in Israel solving its disputes with the Palestinian people, including humanitarian aid for the refugees.
Yeah. So America clearly plays an important role for Israel and Israel's relations for the Middle East, but obviously these relationships seem to have been changing. This is sort of on a personal level too. We want to show a clip of, if you all remember, in 2011 there was a whole gaffe between Sarkozy and Obama. Here you go.
An open mic during last week's G20 summit caught President Obama and French President Nicolas Sarkozy complaining about Israel's prime minister, according to a report by Reuters. "I cannot bear Netanyahu. He's a liar," said Sarkozy. Obama, according to a French interpreter who was translating his remarks, replied, "You're fed up with him, but I have to deal with him even more often than you."
It's probably not that Obama doesn't like Israel, but I think in a way, the Israelis feel sort of left out because for the first time under the Obama administration in a long time, the U.S. has been criticizing Israel as opposed to sort of supporting them with everything they do.
And the U.S. has been reaching out to Iran.
Yeah.
Which upsets Israel because from the perspective of a lot of people in Israel, Iran is their number one security threat. So obviously,
how can an ally of ours as big as the United States be talking?
How can the country that gives us the most security cooperation be now possibly warming relations with our number one security threat? That's a pretty serious, almost philosophical, existential crisis in question for the people in Israel who think that way.
Yeah, and I can understand why the Israeli government would be annoyed by certain policies by the Obama administration, criticizing, etc., going more cautious into the peace talks, trying to really get two sides to agree without sort of taking sides. But I think that's sort of a good thing because for a long time, because the United States did not take this position, and it kind of seemed like they were only looking out for the Israelis' interests and not really being impartial in the peace talks, this was, the Middle Eastern view sort of the United States that now the Obama administration carry by sort of criticizing and not accepting everything that the Israelis want. They're sort of showing this side that, yes, we are allies and we are looking out for their interests, but this doesn't mean we're being partial in any way in the peace negotiation.
Allies can disagree. That's not so terrible. I think it's a sign of a healthy relationship that two countries or more who have a fundamental philosophical, strategic agreement can, in instances here and there, disagree with one another, which could ultimately give America's role in the region a little bit more credibility. If up until this point, all of the other non-Israelis in the region thought of America as just, they're always going to agree with the Israelis. Of course they're going to say that. They're on their side no matter what. How's that going to help? It's not a very good bargaining position for America to be in when we're trying to deal with the other countries. But if now all of a sudden people start questioning the American-Israeli relationship, I think that gives America a bit of, hopefully, more credibility dealing with other groups of people in the region.
Honestly, objectively, by no means is it true that the United States has been abandoning Israel. I mean, Obama might not, want to deal with Netanyahu every day. But
just because the heads of state disagree doesn't mean it's not going to remove the decades of cooperation. It's not going to remove.
I'm sure Obama's not the first person that said that about him.
He just was the first to get caught. At the end of the day, both of those leaders are going to be out of office sometime in the near future. So it'll be interesting to see where things go. From an American perspective, though, I hear a lot about American-Israeli relations. What I don't really hear a lot about are Turkish-Israeli relations, because as important as Israel is to the region, Turkey is also fundamentally important.